let's write our discussion. It's the reverse of the intro with a few extra things. So you start with the current state of the hypothesis, then the current state of the gap, then the current state of the problem, limitations of the current study, and next steps, which are scientific for the most part. Could be policy related, but mostly next steps are scientific. So, current state of the hypothesis or hypotheses. These results showing that, whatever you found, like racial bias and pain treatment was reduced via empathy, provide clear support for the hypothesis that I got to state my hypothesis there. Right? These results showing that racial bias and pain treatment was increased via empathy provide clear disconfirmation of our hypotheses that, so support disconfirmation. Did your results, were they significant? If they were significant, did they support your hypothesis or disconfirm? You got to state that. If your results are inconclusive, you just say these no results are inconclusive and do not adequately test the scientific hypothesis that state your hypothesis. You want to follow up with what your results mean. So here's all three examples for my potential data. Clearly, empathy may prove a valuable tool in reducing racial biases in healthcare. Clearly, empathy ironically increases racial biases in healthcare. Clearly, these inconclusive results make it difficult to hypothesize about the true nature of these effects. So start with my hypotheses, talk about what the results mean, do it like this. Now it's your turn. Pause this video and, well, you'll pause it in a second, but it's your turn. Like I said, it's your turn. Pause this video and do it. So now what you have to do is go back to your intro and read your gap paragraph. You're going to talk about how well your results filled the gap. Now, for me, my gap was that empathy interventions may provide a useful solution to reducing racial biases in healthcare. I also had another gap that I was running an experiment, and experiments can test cause. For this specific discussion, I chose to just focus on my empathy gap. So you got to reread your gap paragraph and you have to reassess that gap that you're talking about. So then I'm going to write about it. This study supports the notion that empathy may prove to be a useful intervention capable of reducing racial bias in pain treatment. That was my gap that I'm filling. However, right, more research is needed to assess the applicability to real non-experimental healthcare settings. Likewise, research is needed to assess if this result is specific to pain treatment. Thus, while we have potentially answered a very important question, I might even write, race does cause racial bias in pain treatment through prejudice. Other research is needed to assess the breadth and depth of these conclusions. Now, if I found inconclusive results, this study provided inconclusive results, right? Experiments may provide a useful mechanism for documenting how patient race and prejudice impact pain treatment decisions. However, we simply do not know. Future research is needed, right? If you are in this situation where you're inconclusive, you need to reevaluate your methods, all right? And all my research methods one students, as you know, your first experiments aren't very good. And I'm not saying this in a bad way. They're not supposed to be. You're new to this, right? Go review the book and get better. Go figure out what you messed up and get better. If you want, come to my office hours and talk to me and I will tell you what you need to do to get better. But if you have inconclusive results, which we all will in Research Methods 1, you got to think about why. Start making your experiment better. That's the whole point of this. Then you go to your current state of the problem, right? My problem was that racial biases in healthcare exist, right? What do we do about that? So you got to reread your problem paragraph. So what am I talking about? So racial biases in healthcare, they're going to be a mix of the systematic racism and the personal racism. So that's what I went for, right? What's my current state? Racial biases in pain treatment are a widespread systematic problem, and an intervention targeting individual treatment decisions, while useful, will not stop racial disparities at their cultural source. Thus, while interpersonal interventions are needed as a stopgap solution for this or to this severe problem, for this is probably better, we must also keep our eye towards the structural and cultural factors that undoubtedly drive both racial disparities and bias in decision making. Racism is not simply individual biases, but is also embedded into cultures and systems. I cite some of my favorite authors here. The current state of the problem. We still have a problem. It's personal, it's structural. Let's get at it. Other researchers, be motivated. That's what you're trying to do here. Then you need to actually focus on the limitations. I don't know where the limitation heading went, but it's not going to be here. Limitations. The most prominent limitations of the study are what? Describe the most prominent limitation. Describe the second most prominent limitation. Maybe the third if you want extra pages, but that's it. Elaborate on each issue individually. Suggest a better study. Let me go. The most prominent limitations of the study are that A, the data were not tested in real-world healthcare settings, and B, individuals were simply reporting their feelings of empathy. Future studies will use real patients in healthcare settings engaged in this intervention to examine if racial biases in hospital settings can be reduced via empathetic interventions. Likewise, we will also utilize psychophysiology to measure the complex state of empathy, an experiment that can document both the external applicability of this intervention and the internal biological states of participants would increase confidence that this intervention is effective in clinical settings and better document the emotional responses that occur within these settings. That last sentence needs some work. You can hear it, right? Rough drafts suck. When you hear that, I'll revise that. I'm going to tell you this. One of my last videos is going to be read this paper out loud and listen for things that are horrible. Then your conclusion, you leave a 1 to 3 sentence take home summary, give it a heading, conclusion. In conclusion, like I'm going to do one. I'm not a huge fan of long conclusions, but you might have 3 hypotheses. You might have more hypotheses. Just go with it. In conclusion, our experiment was inconclusive and does not provide an adequate test of these important issues. In conclusion, empathy may reduce racial disparities in pain treatment, but verification in real world settings is needed, right? I'm just concluding the paper. We have now hit the end of the paper, so we summarize the whole thing in an APA abstract. I'm not going to read mine here. You can pause and read, but you write down one sentence that summarizes your introduction, right? You can see what I'm doing there. I'm kind of focusing on the gap. I'm focusing on the problem, focusing on all the things we just defined. 1 to 2 sentences summarizing the method and result. You can see me do that. You can think of it like a couple sentences for methods, a couple sentences for results. You have 250 words max, which is 1 page. I used about half a page because I like to be brief. So I put it all together. 1 sentence describing the conclusion, what I just said. 1 sentence describing the limitation and next steps. Right? That's my abstract. That covers everything. You do the same thing. You are now done with the writing portion on this paper, and we're going to now we'll talk APA style next and so forth. But you can write a conclusion in no time at all. Follow this. You will be fine, right? This is your abstract. Your conclusion was 1 sentence. Your discussion was a few paragraphs there. Yeah, so that's what you need to do.